Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr, and this week, for the second week, we will have a special guest host standing in, the illustrious, the infamous, the two-time guest, three-plus time Tweet of the Week award winner, always supportive, and mostly food fight critical, Jeff Kolb.
Woohoo!
Jeff.
Welcome to me.
In this episode, we are pleased to welcome Jan Unstad for the entirety of the episode. And to start, we will break down who Jan Unstad is and how she identifies and views the state of the Republican Party and how she helped shape my career. Then we will break down how Minnesota is being viewed on the national stage after the wild 2023 legislative session. We will then go national and break down the presidential race, specifically the pool of presidential candidates developing on the Republican side, recent presidential polls about the race, and more specifically, Biden's standing. Finally, we'll end the show with our typical tweets of the week and the food fight with Brodkorb and Becky. This week, the food fight with Kolb and Becky featuring Jan Unstad. We are going to be debating this week's specifics surrounding favorite summer beverages, alcoholic or otherwise. We are excited for you to be joining us today, and while things won't be the same without my favorite co-host, Jeff and I will do our best, and we hope you enjoy this week's episode, and we will hopefully have Brodkorb, the other namesake, back soon. So, Jeff, thanks for standing in last week. As you guys so kindly discussed, my son was home with a very gross disease illness, hand, foot, and mouth. It was gross. We're over lots of days without sleep. Man, daycare, I tell you, you've got kids. Your kids ever healthy? Does it get better?
It does get better. I can tell you it does get better at some point. Now we still during the winter months things still pass around through the school, but it's definitely not like they were when they were very young. So, and the good news is they grow out of some of those things. I don't think you see hand, foot, and mouth too often after those young years. So that's good. They come home with different things, obviously. But thankfully, we haven't seen anything like lice. I remember we had a big lice outbreak when I was in first grade, so that was exciting. The girl who I shared a locker with had lice, and so we had to go do some preventative measures. So that was exciting, creating lifelong memories.
Let's lead into Jan is an incredible leader with experience in public affairs, events, political, and fundraising world. She has spent a number of years working for Senator Rudy Boschwitz, served as chief fundraiser and later as director of corporate and foundation relations for the University of Minnesota. She spent time as finance director for the 2002 Coleman for Senate campaign and in 2010 for the Emmer for Governor campaign, where she was my boss, which more on that later. And she has raised funds for PACs, organizations, nonprofits, and recently spent 5 years with the Citizens League before starting her own company, where she continues to share decades of wisdom and knowledge with the masses. Welcome, Jan.
Mostly what all that means is I'm old.
You
experienced.
are.
We prefer the term experienced.
Yeah.
So Jan, I invited you on the show. I reached out, and the reason I reached out is because I have this theme in my head that Becky doesn't know yet, but maybe she does. Maybe I can't remember if I sent her the message, but it's people who I have never met in real life, but enjoy their political takes on Twitter. And so I've got guests lined up for the next 3 shows, or this show plus 2 more, and then I'll turn the reins back over to the actual hosts. But I wanted to invite some people who, again, I've never met in real life, but wanted to get a little bit more in depth on their political opinions. So that was part of it. And so we've gone back and forth quite a few times on Twitter about things, or sent some messages, some private messages back and forth. But we haven't met in real life. So, and we still haven't.
I don't know if you remember, but I think it was pre-COVID, and it was before Food Takes existed, because obviously pre-podcast. And you were talking about some hamburger joint, and I said I had never been, and you're like, okay, we need to meet and go to, maybe it was Five Guys or something, and then the world locked down and it never happened. So maybe it's better this way.
Have you been to Five Guys?
I have not.
All right, we'll rectify that. Well,
yeah.
Okay. Now,
I love it.
Now that we've virtually met, okay, well, we have to make that happen. It's worth a try. It's definitely worth a try.
Well,
Well,
it
I love
is
this theme.
interesting to be here.
Interesting. I will
A
take
very
it.
Minnesota word.
That is gonna be our new quote highlighted on our website and social media. It is
It's
interesting to be
interesting
here.
to be here in the most Minnesotan sense of the word.
Indeed.
Well, Jan, obviously with your, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, and I want to, I think we kick it off by maybe if you want to chat a little bit about how you got started in this crazy, wild political world, and then kind of transition into hot takes on today and the chaos that it looks like now.
It's interesting, and I was reminded of it because we had a Rudy Boschwitz staff reunion a couple of weeks ago, and we do these maybe every 5 years. And Rudy's getting older, so they start to become more and more meaningful. But literally, how I got started in this, which is not a story that would ever happen today, was I was stuffing envelopes for Wheelock Whitney when he ran for governor because his campaign office was across the street from where I worked. And like the last week of the campaign, they did a bus tour, and I took the day off and I went on the bus tour. And by happenstance, I ended up seated next to Rudy Boschwitz. So I figured he knew my name. And probably 2 months later, I got laid off from my job. And I went to DC for the first time I had ever been to DC. And I sat in his outer office waiting for him to come back so that I could talk to him and ask him for a job.
Wow, that's like movie meet cute stuff.
I mean, seriously, it was bizarre. So he finally came in and took me into his office, and his receptionist thought I was, some weirdo, and likely correct. Um, And he's like, well, I don't have anything right now. Cause of course, like everybody, I thought, oh, I wanted to be a policy person. And so this would be great. And he said, but let me call the campaign people. Maybe there's a job for you there. So fine, went back home and volunteered on the campaign for like 2 weeks. And then President Reagan called and said he was coming to town. And 6 weeks later, we were going to have a presidential event, the first event I had ever done. And so they hired me.
Wow.
Well, at least you started small. Nothing like
Right.
a
I mean,
presidential event to get you going.
yeah, it's like start with a US senator and a presidential event. It is not a normal political trajectory.
So Jan, one of the things we talked about, you were, I think, a bit reluctant to come on the show, and I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit because there is, I think you come from a time, and I don't, maybe it's not so old-fashioned because Becky, I think you had a little bit of this same experience, but people who have worked on as staff on campaigns or for politicians are kind of two minds on this. Should you be behind the scenes or are you allowed to be out in public and have your own kind of personality? So can you talk a little bit, Jan, about your perception? And then Becky, I'd like to hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, and I am not of two minds about this at all. Staff is behind the scenes. Staff's job is to make whoever their principal is look good and to introduce other people to them. But the idea of staff being out front kind of gags me. I don't have an appreciation for it. You wouldn't even know the names of staff people when I was in there because we were important internally, and that's where having a good boss, a good, senator or whomever matters because they needed to give you the praise so that you felt some of that affirmation. But getting it on the outside, no, ick.
And my experience is very similar. I spent years working for, writing scripts or speeches or whatever it might be for my bosses to go and deliver in person or on video or whatever it may look like. And always standing behind the camera, having, knowing the reporters, but that was not my job to speak on the record. Sometimes press releases or things of that sort, but usually your job is to amplify your boss. And I always would tell any staff that I worked with that if I had to spend, 5 minutes explaining anything they did or said to the press, making excuses or anything, that I would not advocate for them to keep their job because that was a distraction, right? That was, you were meant to be behind. And Jan, your comment about Ann's staff brought me back to when I worked on the McFadden campaign. I had to do a fly around, and one of my biggest fears was obviously, the Wellstone crash is deep in everybody's mind, and My fear was, in those situations, you are unknown. You are and staff. I mean, it
Right.
is Wellstone and staff perish in plane crash. I mean, like, horrible to in any scenario, but to also just like in that scenario, to be on the unknown side was also terrifying of just having that and staff title. But in this respect, it took me a little bit. I think anybody who's listened to this podcast maybe from the beginning will understand that it took me a little bit to understand or even like find my footing a little bit, because it is just a foreign concept for sure.
It
So
absolutely is.
how important is staff to the success of a politician?
Oh, I'd say staff is critical. I mean, if you have a bad staff, you can be a great candidate or a great office holder, but your staff can screw you up and they can let you down and they can become the story these days more than in past days. You cannot possibly be an expert on everything and you can't possibly know everyone. You should know, and you can't possibly go everywhere you're supposed to go. And if your staff is bad, that all just gets amplified.
Do you think, based on your experiences, Becky and Jan, do you think it's fair to judge a candidate based on their staff? If somebody hires a certain staff member, is it fair to make a judgment on that politician based on their hiring of that person?
You know, I have actually said on Twitter to reporters, it would be great when someone announces for office if you also report who their staff members are, because to me that matters. It says something about what the person values and what they place importance on who they hire.
I think there's like a guilt by association almost in that in some regards. I think there's sometimes you find out who is behind a candidate, and it's somebody who's just looking for their next paycheck, that maybe not necessarily even believes in what they're doing or who they're supporting, and just really kind of fighting for that way. I think certainly staff is very crucially important. And to that, Jan, I think you coming from a fundraising is a lot different than anybody that we've talked to or had on the podcast, because I think a lot of people see a lot more of the political side or the communication side and understand what that staff is or does. But can you speak a little bit to, especially, on the Coleman campaign or even Emmer statewide, of what running a multi-million, I mean, you're running and you're tasked with raising millions of dollars. I mean, what does that look like? And just tell us a little bit, maybe some stories of your experience there and the pressures of that.
I when I would interview for jobs, I'd tell people that I describe my job as making people do things they didn't know they wanted to do. Because it's hard to intimidate people into giving money. You can intimidate them potentially into some policy positions, but for someone to give up their own hard-earned cash, and more importantly, all the races I worked on, I really dealt with a finance committee that ended up being lots and lots of people, and lots of people who had recognizable names, and you wanted them to feel comfortable asking their friends and family and coworkers and other CEOs to, join into something. And so you really had to understand persuasion, and you had to be able to give the political arguments so that someone felt like this just wasn't the total lost cause and they were going to give you pity money and then go away.
So, if I could, two things. I wanted to circle back to staff for a second, because I absolutely judge candidates based on who their staff members are. And I can already tell how your campaign's going to go if you have certain people attached to your campaign. And that's been proven out cycle after cycle after cycle. And people get really angry about that. But that's absolutely something that happens. One thing so let's go back to money for a second, because we got to a point at some point, raising money became like almost a bad thing in Republican politics. And I don't understand that, and I don't subscribe to that theory. And I understand that it takes money to win campaigns and things like that. But how do you think we got to the point where the candidate who can raise the most money somehow is looked at by this activist class as it's almost a detriment that they can raise money?
I'm I'm lucky in that my first political boss was Rudy Boschwitz, who had been a finance chair of the state Republican Party and who liked to raise money and who still likes to raise money. And Rudy would tell all of us that every time you asked someone for money, you were giving them a chance to believe in you and in what you stood for and in how you did your job. And that's how we had to view it, that it was just as important as a vote in many ways, because it was someone who was staking their hand in the sand on your behalf. And so I think that really colored my feeling about fundraising, whether it was nonprofit fundraising or whatever. You're giving people a chance to participate in something that's meaningful to them, with something that most people really value, and that's their money. How it became dirty is just beyond me. I mean, if people think that you can run a campaign or run a nonprofit or whatever without cash, they're just flat out wrong.
Well, and especially on the Republican side in Minnesota, because we don't have that apparatus that the Democrats have. And can you speak? So, you obviously, especially back in the Boschwitz time, there was a flourishing, functioning state party. There was, some faith and support behind the overall Republican cause. You obviously, with you guys met on Twitter, are you pay attention to what's still going on in this day and age, and the mega and the activist Republicans, and just Republicans in Minnesota struggling to find their footing. What's a little bit of your insight of what's changed, or how that, I mean, $1 million question, right? But like how things have evolved, and maybe what we can do to get back there.
It's something I struggle with because I come from the Reagan era where if someone agrees with you 80% of the time, that's a good thing, and where the name of the game was persuasion and not intimidation, or vitriol, or figuring if you yelled at someone that somehow that's going to bring them to your side. Tell me exactly how that works in real life, because it doesn't. And so I think that the idea that somehow we're going to be successful because we're pure with an ever shrinking pie is just something that doesn't make sense to me. But it seems like that's the modus operandi these days, is the fewer people, but the stronger they are, the better off we are.
So Jen, you live in Minneapolis.
I do.
Is there some particular, are you being punished, or is there some were you is there some okay, let's move on. So
I
uh
grew up in Minneapolis.
so
You know
so
the
you,
guys at the hardware store, you know?
yeah, so you opened the door on a topic, and one of the things that kind of stinks about a weekly podcast is that you record on a certain day. Today it's Tuesday, and then we'll release on Thursday, and by then some of the news is a little bit old. But I think we'll still be talking about it at the end, toward the end of the week. We had kind of a dust up this week where the chair of the Minneapolis DFL had some not nice things to say about a president that you've brought up a couple times here, Ronald Reagan, tweeting something to the effect of the only good deed that Ronald Reagan ever did was died. That's what she was getting at. She phrased it a little bit differently. Ended up causing some condemnation from Ken Martin, and then some even stronger condemnation from the left of the party against Ken Martin for daring to say that maybe celebrating the death of an American president is not the right thing to do. Any thoughts on that, Jan?
Well, I mean, number one, living in Minneapolis, you have to pay attention to DFL politics, and I do. I mean, I live in the city and I care about the city, and that's where everything happens in Minneapolis. So, yeah, I I will say that I can't understand celebrating the death of really almost anyone. I'm sure there's a dictator or two that would fall outside of that, Hitler, Stalin, take your pick. Um, but the idea of putting out in a public forum this statement that celebrates someone's death is just beyond the pale. I mean, I don't care if it's a politician or your next door neighbor. That is the civility or lack of civility in that is just astonishing to me.
I had a Twitter interaction today. That makes it sound almost like a medical problem, but anyway, I had
Perhaps it is.
I had a Twitter interaction with former state senator Dave Thompson, who mentioned another person that Paul Wellstone, who Becky had mentioned earlier, that when um, or when Paul Wellstone died, there was not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some weirdo, some fringe psychopath out there somewhere, but normal people did not celebrate that. I didn't agree with Paul Wellstone on almost anything politically, but what a horrible human tragedy, not something that you would wish on anyone. And so when you when you contrast something like that, I really think that I, I have to put the stake in the ground and say, Jan, you and I are correct on this. That behavior is aberrant. It's outside the norm. It's indicative of a problem. It's really um, it's really an issue that people behave like that. But there, I think you need a new hobby. I really think if you if you get that worked up about politics, that you are getting to the point that you're wishing death upon somebody, then, or not even necessarily wishing death, but celebrating the death or saying something stupid like, hey, the only good thing Ronald Reagan ever did was die. I mean, that's when you've got to that point of um, I think I think you need to reflect, and I think as a society we need to say um, it's not okay. And I was thankful. I struggle a lot with Ken Martin because I think that I think Ken Martin, first of all, is really really good at what he does, um, but I think he also the he has this kind of two-sided personality where he plays both sides, right? So he's going to say Ken will give the right quote to the press um, on something like this, but then encourage that type of kind of nasty in your face behavior and in other instances. And so I really struggle with people who I think are maybe not entirely genuine in their feelings about condemning this type of behavior. I'd like to think I'm very consistent about it, that there are definitely lines and you can toe up to the line, and I'm not afraid um, to make a point or do kind of get to that line a little bit, because that is politics. There needs to be some back and forth, and it's not a tickle fight, as Michael Brodkorb always says. I mean, but so yes, there's going to be a little bit of a little bit of back and forth, but some spirited back and forth is a lot different than wishing death upon somebody or celebrating their death.
Well, I mean, saying that you disagree with someone, whether it's politically or personally or whatever, there's a lot of space between that and saying, I'm celebrating your death. And I would say it goes beyond politics. It bleeds into life in general. And I am the first to admit I'm old fashioned about this. I don't think that is helpful or useful discourse. Um, but I was shocked when I looked at Twitter, and I missed most of it. I was golfing last night. I golf on Monday nights and got home to this, holy crap, what
How
happened?
dare you?
Yeah, I know, really, have a life. But the idea that the criticism was coming from both sides sort of stunned me, of how dare you criticize that she said it, and how dare you criticize you criticizing she said it. I,
We
I don't
we
know
had
what
a we had another DFL chair double down with some very important comments that I'm not even going to repeat here, but some really nasty stuff about
yeah.
Nancy Reagan. And so, unfortunately for someone like Ken Martin, when you have a number of your kind of elected leaders coming out, you had a state senator jump in on the Reagan stuff and kind of it's tough when you're going to go out and say this is beyond the pale, and then you got some other people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh yeah, you think that's beyond the pale? Uh, wait till you see what I've got to say." And so, I think that gets to a broader problem in politics that we have today. I'm not one who, uh, I, there tends to be a lot of kind of new people who get into politics and think that politics started when they started in politics, right? That history started when I started paying attention, and that kind of thought process drives me crazy. I mean, if you look back at the history of the republic, we did have some actual, physical altercations on the floor of the House of Representatives at one point. There were, so things have been tense. It's not like we haven't had tense politics before. Um, Jan and Becky, in your opinions, since you've been involved in this game for less
A
than
very
five
long time.
minutes, right? Is it different today than it has been in the past? Is the tone and tenor different? And if so, why do you think that is?
I mean, I think obviously the Trump era has a lot to do with it, but I think it's just, in particular, very hypercharged social issues. I think people feel very passionately about their sides of social issues. I mean, I remember I used to be very proud to say, when I worked in the Republican Party, and then I remember when I worked for the state party just, 2, 3 years ago, having to get police escorts to our car from the state fair because we were wearing a shirt that just said Republican, like not even Trump, MAGA. I mean, and it's just, it's very disappointing. And I'll let Jan answer, and then I have a follow up.
Well, and it's interesting because after golf last night, I go out with my girlfriends and we say we talk about the game, but mostly we drink. But we were talking about this exact topic, and all of them said, "Why would anyone run anymore?" I mean, if you are looking to be involved in politics, why would you subject yourself to the kind of discourse that surrounds it these days? And these are reasonable people who have paid attention for a long time, and their reaction is simply to opt out. And so where does that leave us in terms of people who are willing to play in this? Is it the edges? I guess my
Mhm.
observation would be yes, that's it. And there's the middle, um, and I don't like the term the middle because in some things I'm pretty far right and in other things I'm pretty far left. So I suppose I end up aggregated in the middle, but that's certainly not, I wouldn't say I'm milk toast in the center of it all. But it's repellent for a lot of people to listen to this kind of thing and say, if this is what politics is like, if this is how we're being governed, why do we want it?
That's funny. That's funny, Jen, that you said that about the middle. Sorry, Becky, I apologize. I know I cut you off. I know you had a point because I can see your face and you're gonna give me the evil eyes. But people do misunderstand that being in the middle means like you don't have opinions on things. That's not what I guess we're talking about. We're talking about looking at the political spectrum and saying, I know I ain't that, and I know I ain't that, so I guess that puts me in the middle. It's Becky, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted to kind of close out this Minneapolis conversation and what it is, with actually to give you a nod to your tweet last night of saying that, I know we try to not swear on the show, but your tweets put it so eloquently. Said that everyone has the right to make an ass out of themselves on social media, but when you do so, being an officer in the political organization, your behavior reflects on the entire organization. And I think this is similar to candidates, right? I think this is where us as Republicans lose so much on the messaging side because we have situations that, again, when I was at the state party and people were likening the mask mandate to, Hitler and the Holocaust. I mean, nothing as bad as the Holocaust. Hopefully, nothing will ever be as bad as the Holocaust. You wearing a mask while may going against what you personally believe it does not equate that, right? And the amount of conference calls we had to have with party officers, candidates, activists to say, stop saying this. You're distracting from
Please stop
any
saying
mission.
Holocaust. Just lose it from your vocabulary.
Well, and it's not even, I'd say, not even, you're not, yes, you're distracting from it, but you're just flat out wrong.
Right.
You are making it worse for yourself and for everyone else. You are showing a degree of ignorance, I would say,
Mhm.
that's just stunning.
And you're turning off people. Like you said, my mom is
Right.
very similar to your friends that you golf with. She just like texts me all the time and she's like, "Oh, I'm just over this." Like, it just turns those people off. The reporters only have so much time and energy and space to cover stories. We want them covering our plans and our vision for the future, not this crazy tweet that somebody said. And thankfully this time it was on the DFL side, but we've had our share of that. And so
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there is no high ground on this at
yeah.
all.
I don't know if you saw the Dave Orick story on this last night, but he recapped the kind of Hall of Fame or Hall of Shame, I suppose, of Minnesota Twitter fiascos, and I was very glad that I was not listed anywhere on the list. But he kind of had the kind of says the worst of the best.
I want to wrap up. I have one more question for you, Jan, and then let's move on to some of our other topics here. Having been somebody that has worked with donors, worked a lot of donors being within the business community, CEOs, executives at different levels, or people in the C-suite level of the world. Um, we've kind of expressed a little bit of a frustration with business folks kind of, taking a back seat, whether this cycle or the cycles in the past. Obviously, they got burned a couple times for putting, spending money or being involved in some supportive of a candidate. But if you could maybe give some advice to Republicans in this world or to the business world, that of how they could get, dip their toes back in and maybe help us, whether it's with donations or policies or whatever they may look like. Do you have any advice of how we can kind of come back together, Republicans and businesses?
Well, I guess my question would be more to the campaigns and to the elected office holders is what do you want from them? If you just want to use them as a piggy bank, and then do whatever you want and concentrate all of your public and private pronouncements on really divisive stuff and obnoxious stuff, then you shouldn't be surprised if you aren't getting the kind of support that you think you deserve. Um, they are not piggy banks, and they are not folks who you don't end up being a CEO of a company most of the time. There's a couple exceptions I can think of, by just being flat out stupid. And so, what do they know? I mean, I remember back in the early days of Norm, when he was running for governor, that he said when he first became mayor of St. Paul, the first thing he did was go around to the CEOs and other prominent people, nonprofit folks and whatever in St. Paul, and sit down with them and say, "You tell me about the city. Tell me what you think is working, what you think isn't working." You need to do that because there are insights that may exist. And going up to I mean, I literally remember a prominent elected official still in office coming to me after I was doing a fundraiser for someone else from out of state. And she said, "Well, of course you're going to do this for me too, right?" And I'm like, yeah, actually, no, because why should I? What makes you think, just by virtue of holding office, that we're obligated to do this for you? And I was working for a CEO at the time. And it's just that kind of attitude of, well, of course you have to. No, you know what? We've got a choice too.
Do you think there's a way for us to get back there, or is that on us, just on the candidates to kind of be willing and open their minds, arms to have those conversations?
I think it's more on the candidates, and I think that fundraising has changed. When I did most of my political fundraising, at least, there was sort of the churning direct mail kind of fundraising, small dollar events and stuff like that. And the major donors, the group that I tended to spend more of my time with, really had more outsized importance because there just wasn't that much that came in. And now with the amount of small dollar recurring donations that comes in, I think that that has flipped a little bit. And so I am quite confident that there are people who don't think it's worth their time to either give or get those larger dollars because the churn at the bottom keeps it going.
Fair point. I need you to tell one story and then we're gonna jump on. So as I mentioned earlier, you were once my boss about now, which is wild, 12, 13 years ago in the Emmer 2010 gubernatorial campaign. Um, and a quick story, which you may not even remember, but something that I feel like really helped change my perspective or give me perspective on this crazy political world, especially as a young woman entering. So you came in as finance director and I was finance assistant. It was my first job on a campaign. I was 24, 23, 24-ish. Very green, very new at everything here, and major lacking in confidence and, having that wonderful imposter syndrome that, young women in particular love to hold on to. So back then, as we talked about, the party apparatus was very live, functioning, everything of that sort. We had incredible surrogates that came in. We had Newt come in, we had Jindal come in, and we had an event with Mitt Romney that came in. And this is one where I think that uh, that you kind of, maybe, I don't know if you were actually handing over the reins or gave me a little bit more responsibility, but I remember you kind of asking some questions to me of, somebody at the main table didn't show up. What are you going to, who are you going to put there? We're the event's starting, the candidate's in the other room rewriting his speech. What are you going to do about it? And I remember sitting there being a little frustrated at the time, like, you're the expert. Why are you asking me these questions? And I think it was really kind of, that day I was like, what the heck happened? Like, I don't know why this is going on. And the next day I had that aha moment. And I was like, oh, this is really the first view into this world. It is a sink or swim world. You got to figure it out. You have to have the confidence. You have to figure out really, you lean in, make decisions, be quick, be quick on your feet and stand behind it. And I think that for me, while in the moment it was very frustrating, after the fact, I think it was something that really sunk in with me and gave me a lot going forward. So I just want to thank you for that opportunity and learning moment and being a great boss back then.
Well, and I really appreciate that. I don't remember that, but I was almost always older than everybody else, and at some point you have to learn how to be decisive and how to sink or swim. And you make a decision and you stand by it and you figure out how to make it work. And if you don't learn that, particularly with events, you can never do an event in your life.
Yeah, they're hardcore, man.
Okay, so you said one more story, but now I get my last story because Jan and I have communicated about this. My favorite event that I've ever been to was a Jan event when George W. Bush flew into town and landed Air Force One to Van Halen, right now by Van Halen. Seeing Air Force One land on the Jumbotron was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my entire life. I tell the story every time I hear the song, which is actually kind of often because it comes up a lot on the playlist. The kids are big Van Halen fans because I'm a good parent. So that was my favorite Janovan. We fought about whether it was at the Target Center or the Excel Energy Center, and I swear it was at the Target Center, and Jan swears it was at Excel, and I guess she would probably know better, but
And I swear it was at Excel, and it was. And it was literally the last event. And so there was leftover money, and it's like, let's just blow it out. And we got the permission to show, quote unquote, live, of the whole landing. And
are you going to tell me that wasn't live? You're going to break my heart.
oh, it
Was
was
it a
totally
tape delay?
live. With just a slight
There you
delay.
go. All right. Well, moving on here, we're going to jump right over the Minnesota articles. We'll maybe come back to them. We'll put them out on Twitter. There were some great articles highlighting Minnesota and the DFL's single party control and all of the chaos they put forward.
You're
And now
transitioning.
we're going to break down. Nice work.
Break it down.
I have to applaud you real quick that it's been almost 40 minutes and that was really the first time
Yeah.
since the beginning. So nice work.
Thank you.
We are going to break down the presidential race. Let's just talk high level here. It's been a couple of weeks since we've talked presidential. We have DeSantis, we have Tim Scott, we have Youngkin reconsidering. Sununu is out. Haley did a town hall. My man Chris Christie's getting in. Doug Burgum, Mike Pence, a whole lot. Now, Michael and I, when we first started talking about the Republican candidacy and what would be the only way that it could be maybe not Trump is a limited pool, right? If we have it similar as last time and we have a million candidates, it's going to likely just the seas part and Trump, stomps down the middle. Now, that's not yet, a lot of time between now and then, and the race isn't over until the fat lady sings. But here we go. What are your thoughts? Anybody you like? Jan, what do you, I don't want to put you on the spot if you're a Trumper, not Trumper, where you stand with all of this, but do you like Trump? Do you like any of these other ones? What's your feel on it all?
Well, no surprise to anyone. I have never voted for Trump, and that's not going to change. So there's that. I like Nikki Haley. Um, and that's preliminary. I am not someone who thinks that this is a two-person race now. And, do I know anything about it? No, I'm just making it up. But I like her policies. I watched the town hall and it worked really well in the town hall. I don't know how it will translate to the debate stage, but I like how she lays out her line of thinking about things. Even as she went into the abortion issue, which is incredibly difficult for people to talk about. But it's like, okay, well, it needs 60 votes. So how do we get from here to 60 and what actually works? And I think having someone, I am so tired because I did not like Trump at all, of just bombast and policy that was off the top of your head that I could never quite figure out where it came from because a week later it would change, it seemed like. And I think she has a depth of experience that I don't see in other people. And she has a demeanor that lets her get away with saying things that are sort of close to the edge sometimes. But if you say it with a smile, you somehow get away with it a little bit differently. Like Tim Scott on The View. Um, you can go after people and call them out, but do it in a way where people are actually willing to listen to you.
Jeff, thoughts? Whole lot of people here.
There sure are. There are. I think the most interesting person on the stage at the moment is Ron DeSantis, from the standpoint that it seems as if he has been cast as almost the Trump foil or the as like the man. We're focusing a lot of energy on DeSantis now, and you see a lot of people, and this is the thing that drives me crazy because I wasn't the world's biggest Donald Trump fan. I think he deserved a lot of the criticism that he got, but I also it was not crazy anti-Trump person, right? And so if you're going to make the argument that Donald Trump was a unique threat to the republic because of who he was and specifically how he acts, but then you try to turn any Republican who comes after him into Trump, regardless of who they are, I'm just going to stop listening to your noise. And as again, because politics didn't just start when I started paying attention, I'm old enough to remember when Mitt Romney was Hitler. I mean, we were outraged for months about binders full of women, and I know
His
someone.
dog.
I know someone who dressed up as a binder full of women for Halloween, and it was this whole thing. And you look back, and it's like, oh, that's so quaint. But when everything is so dramatic and everything is turned up to 11, then I think you lose not only just me, because that's where you lose me, but I think you lose a lot of people. And I'm very curious to watch how Ron DeSantis, who has really been kind of taken that mantle, I think, of if you talk to many people on the left, they literally think it's illegal to say the word gay in Florida, and that Ron DeSantis paratroopers are going to come down and storm your house. And that's, the truth is actually Florida is a really interesting mirror image of Minnesota, because Florida had all Republican control, while Minnesota had all Democrat control, and you saw what a kind of unified all Republican state looks like, the kind of legislation they passed and the things that they thought were important. And I don't mind a fair critique of that, but you can't just say, Florida's become, Germany from the 1930s at this point, just because, at some point you just kind of lose all credibility in terms of your criticism. So I think DeSantis is the most interesting. I would never, in any circumstances, endorse someone in a primary. I have basically a 100% lose rate in
Yeah.
primaries. So the only people I would ever endorse in a primary is someone you want to lose.
There you go.
But I think that there are some really interesting people, whether they can get into the spotlight. I'd love to hear more from Tim Scott. I'd love to hear more from Nikki Haley. I'd love to. I've heard everything I've ever needed to hear from Chris Christie at this point, but I think some of the other people. Hey, I was a huge Christie fan back in the day, and he lost me during the Trump years because I don't know where the hell he went. He was
Okay.
off in crazy town.
Well, let me address a few things here. First, want to again quickly here. Let's chat. DeSantis' announcement, major failure, right? I mean, that was pretty awful. The Twitter rollout.
I I really don't think it matters. Really.
Same.
We move on so fast. No one's even talking about it anymore. Doesn't
What about
matter.
the messaging of it though? Because I want to read this a little bit and let me. When I read this, I thought it could have been any candidate over the last like 30 years. Um, we should choose a new direction, a path that will lead America's revitalization. I'm running for the president of the United States to lead our great American comeback. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, are we gonna get any not stale messaging from this guy? At least Nikki Haley, I think, has a more unique vision. I do really like Haley. I don't dislike DeSantis. I just was a little. I mean, Romney was and Paul Ryan's race was the great American comeback. Like that was their big tagline. I mean, I just feel like it was a little lazy writing. And I gotta defend my man Chris Christie here. One article I read said the whole vibe of the Republican contest feels increasingly passive aggressive with pretenders giving Mr. Trump the side eye as they throw varying degrees of shade. I agree. While I don't want somebody that's going to necessarily be another bombastic Trump, I do really like Chris Christie, and I think he is one that would be able to go toe to toe with Trump, which is something that I think MAGA supporters want a fighter, and whether that I think all of these candidates can step into that. I think even Haley, who's not necessarily going to be out there fiery, lobbing bombs, but I think that we need somebody to step up in that kind of more aggressive in some capacity to really get there, I think, and be able to fill that void in people's hearts that they want Trump as this at this point.
And,
Two
and that,
really quick things. One is I want Chris Christie in there to do exactly that. I think he's got a role to play, and if he's willing to play it, great. But I'm with Jeff. I don't know how I can trust him again after that. And then on DeSantis, Peggy Noonan had a great column, I don't know, maybe last week, talking about DeSantis and why doesn't he talk about things like, yeah, I might not be warm fuzzy, but I'm competent. Look at how quickly I got things at least moving after Hurricane Ian. Look at this, look at that. And so I think that there is some people are going to have to message to what their strengths are. And I'm not sure I see that happening yet.
That's fair. Last thing I want to point out here, and if you guys have any closing remarks on presidential, is there was a recent poll where 2/3 of Americans believe 66% of Americans view Biden victory in the upcoming presidential election as either a disaster or a setback. And whoa, are those numbers bad for an incumbent president? I mean,
And
it's
in the
paving the
same
way.
article, 56% of the people said the exact same thing about Donald Trump.
Which is why we need somebody else.
I would love anybody else on either side to a fresh start on both sides would be lovely. I tend to be a fatalist. I think we get what we deserve. I really thought we were getting Jeb Bush, so but turns out I was wrong about that. I thought
I
we were going
actually
to
wrote
get
him in.
Did you? Bush versus Clinton was what I expected we deserved. I assume we're going to get Trump versus Biden again, just because everything's awful all the time. But I hope to be proven wrong.
I hope you are wrong.
Our food fight with Kolb and Becky featuring Jan Unstad this week. Favorite summer beverage. Now, this topic comes from Jan. I put out a tweet saying we needed some ideas here. Jan suggested favorite LaCroix flavors. I loved that idea. Jeff is anti fizzy water, so we're this is kind of a addendum to Jan's idea here. So Jan, let's kick us off. What's the number one favorite summer beverage in your mind?
Well, to no surprise, it is fizzy water, and I have a new favorite, Waterloo brand, which they now have at Costco in cases, and they have orange vanilla, which tastes like a melted creamsicle, and it's fabulous.
Interesting.
It's still sparkling water at the end of the day.
And
I'm
that's what makes
drinking.
it great.
I'm drinking right now. Jeff, your number one?
My number one is my patent pending rum punch. That's my favorite summer drink.
Sounds like trouble.
I have been experimenting for a few years trying to get it right. I think I've got it mostly right. It's a little bit of orange juice, a little bit of pineapple juice, dark and light rum, some maraschino cherries, a little bit of grenadine, and then there's this kind of like lime, sweetened lime juice stuff that I found. Pour a little bit of that in there.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Well,
Make it by the pitcher, drink it by the pitcher.
Well, I was gonna say walking disaster there. My number one, I will say, as much as I wanted to put Diet Coke as my number one because it's my all-time favorite beverage, I had a little Michael Brodkorb sitting on my shoulder giving me a hard time about that, which is scary. So I pivoted. I'm going with spiked seltzer, but specifically because I know Jeff is going to give me a hard time if I don't come out with specifics. I'm going with Quirk, the brand Quirk. They have a watermelon salt and lime. Don't knock it till you try it. It's delicious. It is amazing. Highly recommend.
I'm totally writing that down. It sounds wonderful.
Oh, so good. I'll text it to you. It is delicious.
Good.
The variety pack is all great, but that's my number one. All right, number two, Jan.
Well, I have to be honest. It's Sauvignon Blanc, and it has to be from New Zealand. And I don't really care where from New Zealand, but it has to be from New Zealand.
Nebolo, that's number one. Marlboro, I get you. I'll hold my support. Jeff?
Homemade lemonade. That is my number two.
Okay.
Homemade lemonade. And here's the secret, because I found this a couple years ago. You can take the bottle of lemon juice, right? So you get the big green bottle of lemon juice, and you can make lemonade out of lemon juice with just lemon juice, water, and sugar. Very simple, easy to make, very fresh.
This was a revelation to you?
Yes, I thought you had to get like lemons and squeeze them and stuff. That sounds like way too much effort.
What is that lemon juice, though? Thank you, Jan. I thought the same thing. I also, I kind of what my number two is sort of just regular soda water. I have a Soda Stream. I drink like 4 liters of just plain soda water a day. I do like LaCroix, but again, I'm going to stick with my just plain fizzy water all day, every day.
Awful. It just sounds awful.
No taste.
Number three.
Number 3 has to be gin and tonics, and being specific, Hendrick's gin.
There you go. We know Jeff likes his specifics.
I do. My number 3 is, because this is my age, water from the hose.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
my number 3 summer beverage, water from the hose.
Was it on this podcast or a different podcast? I was just listening and somebody had talked about, like, did you really drink water from the hose? And they're like, yeah, we weren't allowed inside.
Yeah, you just
got that little iron taste to it.
Right. It's a little bit warm at first. You got to let it run for a little while in order before it actually gets cold.
I mean, where else were you going to get it? You couldn't come inside till the outside front light went on.
Exactly. My number 3 is also Sauv Blanc. I am a major believer also of the New Zealand Sauv Blanc. Light, refreshing, perfect. If you want to take it up a notch, even a white wine spritzer, add a little bit of my number 2 with my number 3. Have a little bit of a fizzy white wine. I am like the ultimate basic gal with this, but I'll take it all day, every day.
Yeah, that works.
Round 4.
Well, back to LaCroix, and this time it's limoncello LaCroix.
I haven't tried that one.
Oh, it's fabulous.
All right.
My number 4 is an ice cold Coca-Cola Classic.
Very interesting.
Sort of thick for summer?
Yeah.
No, something about it being really hot. You can get a really nice cold Coke. Hits the spot on a summer day.
All right. My number 4 is the Stiegl Grapefruit Radler. Grapefruit beer. Man, it's delicious.
So real quick divergence here. So when I was young, I was a foreign exchange student in Germany, and that was a thing that word Radler was a thing that they did, and it was like orange juice and beer or something, or it was some kind of mix, whatever. And they talked about it and they loved it, and you were always supposed to try Radler.
I've never heard of
Delicious.
it.
Oh, so good. I will say Lonely Blonde's grapefruit, the Minnesota shout out is a close second to grapefruit, but I decided to limit it to only one on my list. All right, let's round out this list here of our food fight this week, our drink fight, I guess. Number 5, Jan.
Number 5 for me is just a portion of a drink. It's akavit. And of course, I am Scandinavian, and it is akavit is you can mix it with anything that you would mix gin or vodka with, but it's just so much better. And they have a distillery in Duluth, Distillery in Duluth, and they have the best akavit like on the planet. Get awards over Norwegian made akavit.
Interesting. We might have to
Okay,
have a tasting.
there we go.
Yeah, super good.
My number 5 is the juice from a Freezy Pop after it's 3/4 melted.
Excellent.
My little divergent there, we introduced my son to, because of his, of course, gross disease in his mouth, we introduced him to Pedialyte Pops, so the Freezy Pops, the
Sure.
Pedialyte Pops.
Yep.
Man, that kid was a fan of that juice. Yeah, he's never had juice. He's never only had milk or water, so.
Oh, then you give him a little bit of flavor, now he's hooked.
Yeah. My number 5 is Prize Royal Raspberry Sour. I love a good sour. That's my all-time favorite, not just summer, year-round. I'll take it. Delish. Very tart.
Fantastic specifics today. I appreciate everybody's list. We got into some real specifics. Your choices leave a bit to be desired, but we got some good specific lists, and that is progress. Jan, I needed to ask you one thing I forgot. Do you get like a discount at IKEA?
No.
Or no? Oh, okay. I was just wondering because of the whole.
I should get discounts everywhere just because, but none of that exists.
I was thinking of you post about whatever, and
Yes.
and it has these words and they have all the little dots on them, and it looks like IKEA furniture labels to me. And I was at IKEA this weekend, and I was thinking, I wonder if you get some kind of cultural discount.
Oh, goodness.
Although it is funny, I will say when I first went to Norway, the thing when you check into a hotel that everyone asks you is, oh, your last name, that's the name of a town. Yes, I do know that. So there are some advantages to being as identifiable as I am.
Oh, well, Jan, we thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone, for coming on and joining us. This was fantastic. I appreciate everything. I thought I had a great time, and I hope it wasn't too painful for you.
It was not. And for my parting comment, just remember with flags that the American flag is always stage right.
Oh, once a event planner, always an event planner.
And if you're ever planning an event that there's going to be flags, bring a wire hanger. Jan, that was the best thing. Now, always keep it in your trunk. You can go in and fix there's nothing that ruins a wonderful, candidate campaign event photo than a flag flipped around and the chaos of it. Jan
Absolutely.
well.
Need to pay attention to the little stuff.
Well, thank you, Jan. We'll chat soon.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. Thanks, Jan. So, Becky, it occurs to me, after having let Jan go, I think I confused Sweden and Norway.
Ooh.
And I guess those are not the same thing?
Yeah,
I don't know.
man,
Not
you might have just made
my
about
thing. I don't
half
know.
of the state of Minnesota mad.
They're not. I didn't know. I thought they were the same thing. Don't they have the same flag, or I don't. Whatever.
They're in the
Not
same
my
area.
deal.
Okay. Well, super grateful for Jan. I know she was, like you said, a little reluctant. She did a great job, represented well. I appreciate her tweets. A good follow on Twitter. Go find Jan Unstad and follow her.
Jan's an interesting person because I think, I mean, if you look at it her background, she's definitely more political than kind of your average person, because obviously she worked in politics. However, from a political standpoint, I think she finds herself, like many, politically homeless at this point, where, as she mentioned about, am I really in the middle? I don't know that I am in the middle, but and that's where I find myself. I look to the left and I go, well, I definitely know that you guys aren't that I'm not that. And then I look to the right and I go, well, I'm not that. I kind of used to be that, but I don't think I'm that anymore. So I don't know what's going on there. So, so I thought, that was actually the tweet she shared that made me think of it, was talking about how, there were some things going on in New York where Republicans were making some gains in New York, and Politico is calling these people MAGA people, but I think at this point MAGA is just one of those things that is meaningless, because now all Republicans are just going to be called MAGA, and so it's just, I don't know, it's a crazy world out there, but I think there are lots of us in the middle, and that doesn't mean we don't have opinions, but it means maybe we just don't align exactly with where the political parties are these days.
I agree. And as Jen mentioned, with her golf friends, I am hopeful that all of this, I keep saying it, but chaos, surrounding the MAGA world, the Trump side of things, doesn't force these folks out and force them to keep their mouth shut and just, get disillusioned by it all, that they stop paying attention or stop being involved, because the only way as Republicans we are going to be able to kind of like, quote unquote, take back our party is by more of these kind of middle, quote unquote, I'm doing my air quotes, middle Republicans, being vocal and sharing our opinions and some criticism and questioning of that other side that we don't agree with and don't believe are a good representation of our party. So time will tell.
I will tell. Tweet of the week?
Tweet of the week. I'm going
Tweet of the
first.
week. You
Now,
go first.
I gotta say, as I'm launching into this, regretting my choice already. I chose one that has a billboard, and the tweet describes the billboard, and we're on a podcast and nobody can see this billboard. But let me read it and then I'll
Okay.
tweet it out. And next week I'll do better when I just am out of practice. I was gone a week. So I apologize in advance. Why we're just going with it. So the tweet says, I genuinely think that adopting a kid in need of a family is one of the most impactful things an individual can do to improve society. Having said that, I am having trouble imagining the person who decides to do it after seeing this billboard. Now, this billboard is literally a billboard that has about 8, looks like Power Rangers superheroes, and says, learn about adopting a teen. Find your Shazamly. I mean, what were the marketing people thinking? I don't know. It's pretty wild. But I
Find your
really
Shazamly.
apologize.
All right. All
I'm
right.
embarrassed. Let's move on.
All right. All right. My tweet of the week might be one of my favorite tweets of all time. And it's about the show last week, actually. And it's from someone named Mike Postma, who is actually on the city council in Austin, Minnesota. His name is actually listed as Mike Trombone Champ Postma. I don't know if maybe he's into the trombone, or that's a inside joke I don't get, but his tweet says, me. I'm not going to get sucked into this Brodkorb, JP Kolb food fight thing. It's just something they're doing to drive clicks and tweets. 15 minutes later, me screaming at my phone, I'm not even from Minnesota originally, and I know that Haggis is the best. So thank you, Mike, for getting sucked in to the food fight, which is, of course, the most controversial part of the show. Hopefully, we made it pretty controversial for you this week. It is okay. It might be something we just do to drive clicks and tweets. I don't know. I'm not really in charge, but
I will say
either
though,
way, it's funny.
I wanna thank him too, because you had not Heggies on your number 5. I put out my list. If you wanna go to @AllerieRL, you can see my 5 that I put out even though I wasn't on last week, and Heggies is on mine. It's delicious. They don't skip on toppings. It's a little slippery and you lose stuff, but it's delicious, and the bar I worked at for a good 6 summers in a row, served it late night. delish. So
See, I honestly think Heggies is one of those things. Like if you have an attachment to it because you were in a bar and you ate it, you're into it. And if you haven't, which I haven't, then you don't. And I think it's
there,
just one of those things, and that's okay.
it is. Well, Jeff, thank you again for holding down the fort last week without me, joining me this week, and being here for the next couple of weeks. We miss Michael. We're wishing him well, and again grateful, as he said, for all of the support. Keep sending your well wishes, and we're gonna have him back sooner than later. We know it, and thank you for a great show. So let's close us out here. Do I get my transition noise?
Oh, wait. Let me find it. See, I'm not good at it.
No,
I'm
you
not like,
failed. We
I
got the
know.
music.
I gotta be, wait.
Michael's gonna hook us up with the music anyway. We want to thank you
Yeah.
for listening to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, featuring Jeff Kolb. Before we go, broken love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review on our website, bbreakpod.com. Again, the website's bbreakpod.com, at Twitter at bbreakpod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, featuring guest host Kolb, will return next week. Have a good one.
Have a good one.